Don't forget to subscribe. Enjoy your viewing.
My name is Daniel Carter, and until recently, I believed that trust was the cornerstone of every loving relationship. I never imagined that the very person I held closest to me, my wife, would betray that trust in the most painful way. I still remember the moment when the veil of our perfect life began to tear apart, leaving behind an endless void filled with anger, disbelief, and sorrow. I met Elizabeth when we were both young and full of dreams. Her laughter was infectious, and her sparkling eyes held promises of an extraordinary future. For years, we built our lives together, sharing hopes, ambitions, and countless cherished memories. Our home was filled with warmth, and every corner seemed to whisper secrets of our happiness. I was proud of the family we were creating, convinced that nothing could ever shatter the bond we shared. Yet, as life often has a way of reminding us of its unpredictable nature, the cracks began to appear in the most unexpected moments. At first, it was the subtle changes, the way Elizabeth started to hide her phone, her unexplained late-night outings, and the distant look in her eyes when we were alone. I tried to dismiss these signs, chalking them up to the stress of everyday life, convinced that our love was strong enough to weather any storm. One autumn evening, as the wind howled outside and the golden leaves danced in the fading light, I found myself alone in our study. I had stayed behind to catch up on some work while Elizabeth was out with a friend. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that sometimes foreshadows hidden truths. As I scrolled through emails on my laptop, a notification popped up on my phone, an unexpected message from a number I did not recognize. Curiosity turned to unease as I opened the message, and in that moment, a chill ran down my spine. It was a conversation, a series of messages that revealed the unthinkable. Elizabeth had been involved with someone else. The realization hit me like a tidal wave, drowning me in a flood of emotions. Anger, betrayal, and a deep sense of loss surged within me as I tried to comprehend how the woman I loved could have strayed so far from our promises. I replayed every moment in my head, every word she had said, every touch that once felt so genuine, now tainted by deceit. The trust one had placed in her was shattered into a million irreparable pieces. In the days that followed, I became a ghost in my own home, haunted by memories and the constant echo of betrayal. I found myself pacing the cold, empty rooms, unable to escape the relentless questioning, when did it all start? How could I have been so blind? I sought answers in the silence of the night, but all I found were echoes of a love that was once real. The man I once was, filled with hope and certainty, now felt lost and abandoned in a labyrinth of shattered dreams. I confronted Elizabeth that evening, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and despair. We sat at our dining table, the atmosphere charged with tension, as I demanded an explanation for her actions. Her eyes, once a beacon of warmth, now held a cold detachment that pierced through me like a knife. She admitted to the affair with a man named Andrew, a name that now symbolized the betrayal that had turned my life upside down. The conversation was a whirlwind of accusations, tears, and bitter regrets. Every word she uttered drove the final nail into the coffin of our marriage, sealing our fate in silence and pain. As the weeks turned into months, I struggled to reconcile the image of Elizabeth I had loved with the stranger she had become. I began to question every memory, every shared secret. The photos on our shelves and the souvenirs from trips that once symbolized our unity now served as constant reminders of a past that was slipping further away with each passing day. I tried to hold on to hope, to convince myself that perhaps this betrayal could be mended, that love might heal all wounds. But deep inside, I knew that nothing would ever be the same. In my quest for solace, I immersed myself in work and sought refuge in the company of old friends. Yet, even amidst the laughter and distractions, the pain was always lurking in the background, an uninvited guest that refused to leave. I spent countless nights wandering the quiet streets of our neighborhood, the cold pavement under my feet echoing the emptiness in my heart. Every step was a reminder of how far I had fallen, from the man who once believed in unyielding love to someone now crippled by betrayal. The realization slowly dawned on me that trust, once broken, cannot be easily restored. The more I tried to piece together the fragments of our past, the clearer it became that Elizabeth had chosen a different path, a path that led her away from our shared future. It wasn't just the affair, it was the erosion of our entire foundation. I began to understand that love cannot survive in the shadows of deceit, and the vibrant colors of our relationship had faded into a bleak tapestry of regret and sorrow. Now, as I sit here alone in the dim light of a winter afternoon, I am left to grapple with the fragments of what once was. My heart, once open and full of life, is now guarded by walls built from shattered trust and broken promises. I am no longer the man who believed in forever. I have become a testament to the fragility of love, a silent reminder that even the deepest bonds can be torn apart by betrayal. Yet, in the midst of this despair, there remains a part of me that clings to the memories of our happier times, a bittersweet relic of a love that once burned brightly. I know that the road ahead will be long and filled with uncertainty, but I also understand that this pain, as overwhelming as it is now, will eventually give way to healing. In time, I hope to rediscover the strength within me to forgive, not for her sake, but for my own. However, that journey seems distant as I stare at the ruins of our relationship, a stark and unyielding reminder that some wounds never fully heal. This is not a tale of redemption, but rather the beginning of a long and arduous process of reclaiming my identity from the wreckage of a once beautiful life. The hostile breakup that now seems inevitable is both an end and a reluctant new beginning, a painful farewell to the past and an uncertain embrace of what lies ahead. I have learned that some stories do not have a fairy tale ending, and as I pen down these thoughts, I brace myself for the inevitable storm that will define the next chapter of my life. I spent the first weeks after our confrontation lost in a whirlwind of thoughts and raw emotions. Every morning, as I woke in the cold silence of our shared home, I felt the weight of betrayal press down on my chest. Days bled into nights, and I found myself unable to escape the echo of every whispered lie and secret glance. My mind, once a reservoir of hope and dreams, was now cluttered with painful memories that seemed to mock me at every turn. After the confrontation with Elizabeth, I was determined to understand how our relationship had unraveled so completely. I revisited every moment of our past together, searching for signs that I might have missed. I pored over old letters, cherished photographs, and even the mundane text messages that had once been tokens of our connection. I tried to piece together the story of us, a narrative that once promised eternal love but was now irreversibly marred by deception. During this tumultuous period, I began to notice a disturbing pattern. Every time I attempted to address my pain with Elizabeth, the conversation dissolved into a maze of deflections and half-hearted explanations. One evening, I sat her down in our living room, desperate for any insight into the growing chasm between us. With a voice quivering on the edge of collapse, I asked her to recount the days leading up to the affair. Instead of answers, I was met with silence, a silence so heavy that it seemed to speak louder than any words could. Elizabeth's eyes, once so expressive and full of promise, now darted away as if hiding unspeakable truths. I realized then that the woman I loved had built a fortress around her secrets, a fortress too high for me to breach. In an effort to confront the storm raging inside me, I sought solace in solitude. I began taking long walks along the city streets, hoping that the rhythmic pounding of my footsteps might drown out the clamor of my inner doubts. The crisp air and the sound of distant traffic provided a temporary distraction, yet even nature seemed to mirror my turmoil. Trees that had once been vibrant and full of life now appeared to droop in melancholy, as if mourning the loss of innocence in our lives. With every step, I questioned my own identity. Had I lost myself in a relationship that was never as genuine as I believed? One particular evening, as dusk merged into the deep blues of night, I found myself on a bridge overlooking a restless river. The water churned violently, reflecting the turbulent emotions I felt inside. I recalled happier times, when Elizabeth and I would sit by the water, our conversations light and full of laughter, dreaming of a future built on mutual respect and trust. Now, that same river seemed to carry away not only the remnants of our shared past but also the remnants of the man I once was. I stood there for hours, caught between the memories of what had been and the grim reality of what was. Back at home, the silence that had once been our sanctuary had transformed into a battleground. Elizabeth retreated into herself, spending more and more time locked away in our bedroom, while I was left to wander the halls of a home that no longer felt like mine. Every room bore witness to our lost dreams, a half-packed suitcase by the door, a photograph of a vacation now covered in dust. The physical remnants of our life together were painful reminders of a bond that had been so brutally severed. I tried to reach out to her several times, attempting to bridge the gap with fragments of understanding and even forgiveness. But every effort was met with indifference or a cold, measured retort. It became painfully clear that the chasm between us was widening with each passing day, fueled by the scars of betrayal that neither of us could ignore. My heart ached with the realization that reconciliation was slipping further out of reach. I began to accept that the pain was not something to be healed with time alone, but a wound that had festered beyond repair. Desperation drove me to confront not just Elizabeth, but also the emotions I had long suppressed. I penned letters I never intended to send, pouring out the agony of each broken promise and shattered dream. In these writings, I was brutally honest with myself, acknowledging my own faults, the times I had been too blind to see the signs, and the love that had slowly withered under the weight of betrayal. Each sentence was a cathartic release, yet with every word I wrote, I felt the finality of our unraveling relationship become ever more undeniable. In the midst of this internal storm, a chance encounter at a local cafe jolted me from my introspection. I met an old friend, Michael, who had noticed the dark circles under my eyes and the haunted look in my gaze. Over coffee, I found myself recounting my struggle to come to terms with our broken marriage. Michael listened intently, his eyes filled with empathy and sorrow. He reminded me that sometimes the path to healing lay not in clinging to a crumbling past, but in accepting the inevitable end of a painful chapter. His words, though gentle, struck me with a clarity that I had long been denying. I had to let go, not as a defeat, but as a step toward reclaiming my life. That night, as I sat alone in the quiet of our dimly lit living room, I confronted the painful truth. The constant tension, the silent accusations, and the overwhelming despair had all conspired to create an insurmountable wall between Elizabeth and me. I could see that our once vibrant partnership had decayed into a lifeless arrangement, a shadow of what it had been, sustained only by habit and a lingering sense of duty. The vision of a shared future, full of promise and love, had been replaced by the stark reality of two souls drifting apart, each haunted by the memory of trust betrayed. I gathered the remnants of my strength and decided that I could no longer allow myself to be imprisoned by the past. The time had come to face the inevitable, the dissolution of our marriage. I knew that separating from Elizabeth would be a painful and hostile process, a confrontation not just of two individuals, but of all the shared dreams and ambitions that had once bound us together. Yet, in that realization lay a bittersweet liberation, the chance to start anew, to rebuild my identity without the shadows of deceit and regret. As I prepared to broach the subject with Elizabeth the following day, I steeled myself for the impending confrontation. I knew that our conversation would not yield easy answers or reconciliation. Instead, it would likely set the stage for a final, irrevocable parting of ways, a separation marked by lingering resentment and a mutual recognition of the profound damage inflicted by betrayal. Standing at the precipice of this turning point, I felt a deep, resonant sorrow mingled with a stubborn resolve. I was determined to reclaim the pieces of my shattered self, even if it meant enduring the tumultuous process of disentangling our lives. In the silent recesses of my mind, I acknowledged that the journey ahead would be fraught with pain, yet it was a necessary step toward a future unburdened by the echoes of a once-cherished love. The daybreak signaled not only the start of another long, introspective day but also the beginning of the end for the union that had defined so much of my existence. The decision to end our marriage was not taken lightly. It was born out of a relentless struggle to preserve what little dignity and hope remained within me. I knew that the final chapters of our story would be written in the harsh ink of separation and strife, a testament to the devastating consequences of broken trust. The next few days felt like a relentless descent into an abyss where every moment was steeped in the bitterness of our impending separation. After the heavy conversation the day before, Elizabeth and I found ourselves face to face in a cold, sterile living room that no longer held any traces of our once shared warmth. The silence between us was laden with unsaid accusations and the quiet resignation of two people who had reached the end of their tether. I sat at the worn-out coffee table, a relic of happier times, waiting for Elizabeth to speak first, a gesture that, in our shattered world, was now a prelude to a confrontation. Elizabeth's eyes, shadowed by regret and defiance, met mine across the table. "Daniel," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "we need to discuss how this is going to end." Her tone was calm, yet each syllable carried an undercurrent of hardened resolve. I nodded, knowing that our conversation was the final attempt to salvage some remnant of dignity before the inevitable finality of divorce took hold. Over the course of several hours, we dissected every aspect of our shared life, the finances we had painstakingly built together, the cherished possessions that were now nothing more than physical representations of memories tainted by betrayal, and the emotional wounds that neither of us seemed able to ignore. Every item we discussed became a battleground, each word a subtle reminder of the irreparable damage wrought by the choices made. Elizabeth insisted on a swift, decisive split. I, however, found myself clinging to the notion that some semblance of mutual respect could still be salvaged from the wreckage. As the day wore on, we found ourselves locked in a bitter debate over even the smallest details. Who would keep the family home? What about the joint savings account that had once symbolized our united future? I proposed a fair division, seeking a compromise that would allow us both to begin rebuilding our lives. But Elizabeth, fueled by anger and a sense of betrayal, countered with demands that were as unyielding as they were personal. Her arguments were laced with accusations that cut deep, claims that I had been oblivious to her suffering, that my own neglect had driven her to seek solace elsewhere. Each word stung, not just as a rebuttal, but as a reminder of the profound disconnect that had grown between us. In that charged atmosphere, I began to feel a transformation within myself. The sorrow and confusion of the previous weeks were slowly morphing into a cold determination. I realized that the life we had built was now nothing more than a collection of shattered dreams and bitter memories. The more we argued, the clearer it became that neither of us could ever reclaim the innocence of our past. Our negotiation, initially an attempt at mutual compromise, had devolved into a duel of wounded pride and unhealed scars. At one point, as Elizabeth's voice escalated in frustration, she slammed her hand onto the table, sending a few scattered papers fluttering to the floor. The sound echoed through the room, punctuating the painful finality of our discussions. In that moment, I saw not just my wife, but a woman who had reached the limits of her emotional endurance. I felt a surge of anger, not solely at her actions, but at the inescapable fact that our relationship had irrevocably crumbled. It was a moment of harsh clarity. Love, once cherished, had been consumed by the flames of betrayal, leaving behind only the scorched remnants of what might have been. I took a deep breath and gathered my thoughts. "Elizabeth," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "this isn't about assigning blame anymore. It's about acknowledging that we've both hurt each other beyond repair." My words, though measured, seemed to fall on deaf ears as she retorted with a mix of bitterness and sorrow. We circled around old grievances, each of us unwilling to give ground, as the room became a crucible of our shared pain. Throughout the negotiation, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought us here. I recalled the moments when our laughter filled the halls, the shared dreams of a bright future, and the times when we believed that nothing could ever come between us. Now, those memories felt like ghosts haunting the edges of our conversation, a constant reminder of what we had lost. The contrast between our past and present was stark, and it left me with a profound sense of mourning. Not just for the love that had faded, but for the person I had once been, hopeful, kind, and utterly in love. As we continued our dialogue, the discussion turned toward the inevitable legalities of our separation. We agreed to consult a mediator, someone who could help us navigate the murky waters of property division and financial settlements. The prospect of sharing our most personal aspects with a stranger filled me with dread, yet it seemed an unavoidable step toward finalizing our breakup. The idea of having to recount every painful detail to an outsider was almost too much to bear, but I knew that it was a necessary part of untangling the lives we had so intricately woven together. That evening, as I drove home in a car that suddenly felt like it belonged to someone else, I was overwhelmed by a sense of finality. The city lights blurred past me, each one a fleeting glimpse into a future that now promised nothing but solitude and the arduous task of rebuilding a fractured identity. I thought of Michael's words, the gentle urging to let go, to accept the inevitable as a step toward a new beginning. But even as his voice echoed in my mind, I felt no comfort in his counsel. Instead, I was left with a heavy burden of regret and an unyielding resolve that the bitter taste of betrayal would not be my final chapter. Upon returning home, I found the silence in our apartment more oppressive than ever. The walls, once filled with pictures of happier times, now stared back at me as if accusing me of clinging to a past that no longer existed. I moved from room to room, touching the objects that were once symbols of our shared dreams, now relics of a love that had been consumed by deceit and anger. With every step, I felt the need to reclaim my own identity, an identity that had been subsumed by the relationship, only to emerge now, raw and unguarded. Late that night, I sat down at my desk and began writing. I scribbled down every thought, every memory, every betrayal that had led to this moment. The words spilled out in a torrent, forming a narrative that was as painful as it was cathartic. It was a testament to the love that had once been so vibrant, and to the deep scars left behind by its dissolution. I knew that these words would be the only legacy of what had once been a beautiful, albeit doomed, union. In that quiet solitude, I finally accepted the truth. The road ahead would be steeped in bitterness and loneliness, and the wounds inflicted by our broken trust would take years, if not a lifetime, to heal. The negotiation with Elizabeth had not only marked the end of our marriage, it had signified the irrevocable loss of a part of myself. Yet, amid the wreckage, there lay a small, stubborn ember of hope. Perhaps, with time, I could rebuild, not the life we once dreamed of, but a new one defined by resilience, honesty, and the hard-earned wisdom of a man who had known both the heights of love and the depths of despair. As the chapter of our shared life drew to a close, I was left with the sobering realization that sometimes, the final act in a tragic romance is not a moment of catharsis, but a lingering silence filled with regret and unanswered questions. Elizabeth and I had reached a point where our negotiation was less about division of assets and more about a profound, mutual acknowledgement that our paths would now diverge, each carrying the weight of lost dreams and a future marked by inevitable solitude. In the weeks that followed our bitter negotiations, the tension between Elizabeth and me grew into an unyielding hostility that filled every corner of our once shared home. I woke each day to a silence so oppressive it felt as though the walls themselves were conspiring against us, echoing the memories of happier times that now seemed like cruel mirages. It was as if the house had become an arena for a final showdown, a place where each creaking floorboard and flickering light was a reminder of the life we had lost, and of the unbridgeable chasm that had opened between us. From the moment our negotiations had devolved into bitter exchanges, the hope of any amicable parting had evaporated. Elizabeth's demeanor, once full of tentative remorse, had hardened into an icy resolve. I had watched her transform before my eyes. The woman who had once craved love and connection was now consumed by a determination to erase any vestige of the past, even if it meant leaving nothing but smoldering ruins behind. Every interaction turned into a battle of wills, where neither of us was willing to yield an inch. Our voices, once intertwined in the gentle cadence of shared dreams, now clashed like weapons, each word laced with venom and regret. One particular evening, after a day punctuated by relentless arguments over trivial matters, a misplaced photograph, a broken mug, the disputed use of a favorite chair, I reached my breaking point. The atmosphere in our living room was thick with resentment, even the air seemed to tremble under the weight of our mutual hostility. Elizabeth stood at the window, her profile silhouetted against the darkening sky, and I could see the tension in every line of her face. "We've reached the end, haven't we?" she said, her tone neither questioning nor confirming, but simply stating a fact that was as clear as the shadows creeping across the floor. Her words were a knife in my chest. In that moment, the last remnants of our shared past disintegrated before my eyes. I stepped forward, my heart pounding with a mix of anger and sorrow, and faced her directly. "Yes, Elizabeth," I replied, my voice tight with emotion. "It's over." There was no room for denial now. Every day had been a testament to our failure to salvage what once was, and every argument had chipped away at the foundation of our union. The conversation that followed was as brutal as it was final. We traded harsh words like blows in a fight, each accusation a testament to the deep-seated pain we had both endured. Elizabeth's eyes flashed with indignation as she recounted every slight, every moment when she had felt trapped and unheard. I, too, unleashed my pent-up fury, lamenting the betrayal that had shattered my trust and left me questioning my own worth. It was a cathartic outpouring of emotions, a purge of the toxic remnants of our relationship, but it came at the cost of any possibility of reconciliation. As the night deepened, our voices subsided into a strained silence. In that quiet, every unspoken word loomed large, and the reality of our situation became painfully clear. The legal and financial entanglements that had once seemed like mere formalities were now stark reminders of the life we were forced to dismantle. We both knew that the paperwork would soon follow, each signature a final farewell to the shared history that had defined so much of who we were. Yet, beneath the veneer of practicality, there simmered a profound animosity, a mutual understanding that this breakup was not a simple, tidy separation, but an irrevocable severing of our souls. In the days that followed that fateful conversation, I began the arduous process of untangling our lives. Every document I signed, every asset I divided felt like a concession, a small piece of the love we had lost. The process was mechanical, almost surreal, as if I were watching someone else's life unfold. Even as I packed away mementos of our happier times, a bitter irony gnawed at me. Each treasured item was now a relic of betrayal, a tangible reminder that the person I once loved had become a stranger whose only legacy was the pain she had inflicted. The final day of our shared existence arrived with a chill in the air, mirroring the frost that had settled in our hearts. We met one last time in the dim light of the early morning, the apartment stripped bare of any lingering warmth. There were no gentle goodbyes, no promises of staying friends, only the cold efficiency of finality. Elizabeth's eyes, once capable of conveying unspoken affection, now held only a steely determination to move forward without the burden of our past. I, too, felt a numb detachment, as if I were watching the end of my life in slow motion, unable to intervene or change the inevitable outcome. Standing by the door, I watched her gather the few remaining personal belongings, a scarf, a book of poems, a framed photo of a moment we could never reclaim. With each item she took, the distance between us widened until it became a chasm, unbridgeable and raw. "Goodbye, Daniel," she said softly, the words barely audible over the silence. It was a farewell devoid of warmth, a final severance of the ties that had once bound us together. The door closed with a resounding finality that echoed through the empty rooms. In that moment, as I stood alone amidst the remnants of a life shared, I felt the full weight of what had been lost. The betrayal, the bitter negotiations, the final, hostile separation, all of it converged into a single, crushing realization: we had become irreparably broken. The love that had once seemed so invincible was now reduced to a memory of pain and regret, a lesson learned through the harshest of experiences. In the solitude that followed, I found myself grappling with the enormity of the decision we had both made. There was no victory in our parting, only the quiet devastation of a future now void of the shared dreams and mutual hopes that had once sustained us. The journey ahead would be long and lonely, marked by the slow process of healing and the painful task of rebuilding a self that had been defined by a love now turned bitter. Yet, even amid the wreckage, I recognized the stark necessity of this final dissolution. It was a necessary severance, an acknowledgement that some wounds run too deep to ever fully heal. As I gathered the scattered pieces of my identity from the ruins of our past, I resolved to move forward, not with the hope of reconciling what was lost, but with the determination to forge a new path, free from the ghosts of betrayal and the shadows of our former life. The hostile breakup, as painful as it was, marked the beginning of a journey toward self-reclamation. In the aftermath of our dissolution, there would be no more whispers of regret, no lingering promises of what could have been. There would only be the raw, unfiltered reality of two lives that had finally diverged, each set on a path that no longer intertwined. In the quiet that followed her departure, I felt a strange sense of liberation amid the sorrow. The hostile breakup had stripped away the illusions that had once defined our relationship, leaving me with the unvarnished truth of who I was and what I needed to survive. And though the pain of betrayal still pulsed through my veins, I began to understand that this final severance was not just an end, but also a chance to rebuild, to learn from the ruins, and perhaps, someday, to find a semblance of peace within the shattered remains of my heart.